Daniel Blake is up for Best Film. And now, Danny, I know that you were at the heart of a lot of debate about this movie. Why do you love it so much?
Well, I think it's a film that speaks to a lot of people about their experience of life, and it's an experience of life that they're not seeing in the media. So cinema is suddenly taking this incredibly important, wonderful role of actually giving voice to people's experience, you know, because the papers aren't doing it, TV aren't doing it, so movies are doing it. That's part of why I love it. And then I also love it because I think for people who it's not their experience of life directly, they're getting an insight into those people's lives, which again aren't being represented. So I think it's a whole new role for cinema, and that's, I think, why I connected with that movie so much, because you don't see films which do that very often. You don't see films which just take a hidden corner of life, and the life which actually is just out of sight, you know, in everyday life in Britain, and suddenly shine a spotlight on it and engage with an audience to the degree of emotional intensity that that film has. I think it's astonishing.
It has been criticised for being very political or even preachy, but can a film ever be too political?
They can be, and I think Ken Loach films in the past have been didactic, if you like, preachy, if you like, but sometimes he gets it absolutely spot on right, and his humanity comes through. And I think Daniel Blake is the best example of it. I was at Cannes when it won the Palme d'Or. I wanted to cheer it like like England had won the World Cup, because it's not the most finessed cinematic film. You don't kind of marvel at the shots and the editing and all the kind of craft of it. It's a very simple film, as Ken Loach himself admits, but it speaks so to the heart. It speaks to exactly where Britain is, and as Danny said, who else would dare to take us into a food bank? And not in a documentary, but the drama of being in a food bank, the actual hunger of being in a food bank, the actual nearness. It's sort of down the street. It's happening in the street next to you. You might not go down that street just to avoid it. Ken Loach makes you not avoid it and makes you confront it. And I think that's the power of Daniel Blake. And I think it's, you know, the slogan became "We are all Daniel Blake." And I think often with Ken Loach films, they're about signalmen or miners or teenage, you know, pizza delivery boys. You've got to be, almost feel part of that milieu. This one speaks to across-the-board society, connecting everyone from Newcastle to London. Hayley Squires, David Johns. It's an absolutely crucial bit of what modern cinema can do, and it's interesting that it comes from a guy who's been doing this for 50 years. You know, he has finally got it absolutely spot-on, perfect right.
It's putting the human face on the statistics and putting the human face on the story. Not that he's unrecognised for doing this, but it's not talked about quite enough. It's his gift for working with actors, with non-professional actors as well, and getting these astonishing performances from them. And that's where the humanity comes from. And so he takes these very politically engaged films and he makes them human stories, because as a director, he's interested not just in politics, but he's also interested in character, and he's also interested in humanity. And it's the combination of those two things which I think makes this quite such a special film.
Hayley Squires, of course, has been nominated for Supporting Actress and has criticised the lack of roles for working-class women, either being heroin users or unfit mothers, and, you know, really leapt at the chance to do this movie. Do you think this has kind of maybe paved the way for other films, more of this ilk in the future? Do you think people are going to be braver?
You would have hoped so. I mean, you could go back to Kathy Come Home, which Ken Loach did 50 years ago, and sort of say, well, Carol White's performance in that, there weren't enough of those. You know, it sort of takes a Ken Loach to bring these characters to life sometimes, which is the great shame. What he does here, she's not heroin addict, she's not an unfit mother. These are not people trying to cheat the system. These are people who are being cheated by the system. But they're not victims, they're fighting back. They're full of, you know, heart and wit. One often forgets how funny Ken Loach films often are. You know, that's what's so brilliant about her performance in this, that she's tender, she's funny, and yet she's being forced into these kind of awful, dehumanising situations, yet as a performer never loses sight of that essential humanity.
I think with Hayley Squires as well, what's interesting is that she has, I mean, people see the film when they talk about the Foodbank scene, because it's the scene at the food bank which just has that devastating effect on, I think, on people emotionally. That sometimes those big scenes, you can see the moment of calculation just beforehand, and everybody knows this is the scene.
The awardsy scene.
Exactly, and it doesn't feel like that for a second. She's so inside the character, and I know that she did. I mean, I think she pretty much fasted for 4 days.
She fasted to make her that hunger feel real. Yeah,
it feels so real. It doesn't feel for a second like an actress giving a performance, and certainly not like an actress giving an awards performance. It feels like a character unfolding before and unravelling before your eyes.
And Dave Johns, in a very similar way, you know, that is a real man that you're watching on screen, and he, of course, hasn't been nominated nominated. Do you think that's a slight overlook?
I mean, it's a shame. Dave Johns gives this incredibly likeable and incredibly relatable performance. It would be nice to find space for him, but also I'm glad that Ken is getting the recognition as director, because again, getting that performance from Dave Johns is a huge credit to Dave Johns. It's also a huge credit to Ken. Drawing those performances out, that's astonishing. If I'm doing that when I'm 80, then that's fine.
Do you think anyone would dare to condescend to Ken Loach?
No, he'd tell them what for.
He would definitely tell them what for.
Well, I mean, that's the joy of the film, is that I think critics in the press, politicians have tried to sort of condescend to it. And the work speaks for itself, but Ken Loach has also talked about, the political element of this. You can just watch it as a film, but there is a huge political track to it, which probably none of the other films quite have. And you almost sort of go, you know what, Ken, you're absolutely right. That it's almost unarguable.
Which is why it's been, nominated for Outstanding British Film as well. And now I think the last film to win the double Best Film and Outstanding British Film was The King's Speech.
Right.
Do you think that I, Daniel Blake, can do the double?
I think it would be. I think it should. Part of me thinks it should. I mean, I think it would depend if BAFTA voters have seen the movie in a cinema with a kind of live audience, because I think the response, and this is astonishing, you can't confect this stuff. The reaction people were having was heartfelt and was visceral, and people were sobbing out in the seats. And I think if people who are voting now saw that, then I think their connection with the movie will be very real.
And Ken Loach, 7th nomination, no wins as yet. Could he do it?
Again, it's interesting because, I mean, Ken never makes the kind of films which they don't have that sort of flash to them. But, I mean, it would be interesting with the BAFTA votership to recognise what he does with actors.
Paul Laverty has been nominated for original screenplay, and the dialect in this film is it's quite stunning, really. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, of course, Ken Loach and Paul Laverty have been collaborating now. I think this is their 13th film together. They've got this groove. Ken Loach was one of the great myths, was that he was retired. He wasn't going to make feature films again. But Paul Laverty was doing his research, looking at the state of Britain, and he found things that he said to Ken in a phone call, look, there are food banks going on, and sort of Ken said, well, we've got to go and cover these things. And this synergy that they have, this almost symbiotic relationship that Paul Laverty has with the political, and how to make those images cinematic, it was just something that Ken Loach couldn't ignore. And the two of them kind of really spark off. What he says in his screenplays over the body of work has been an absolute kind of snapshot of Britain. He's kind of one of a national treasure in a way. He'd probably hate me for saying that.
So join us on the 12th of Feb to find out who the winners are.